Well, there we go. Been talking now for 5 minutes, and I just realized my mic wasn't picking up. All right, guess it could have been worse. I could have been talking for 20 minutes. Just realized I had no signal. So, took me a few minutes to get set up today. My head's a little out there. I had to take care of some things this morning. Guess we're gonna go through that speech again then now. So, from the tomes, you are watching me as I write and develop and work on game-related content, tabletop RPG related content. If you're on Twitch, you know where I'm at. From the tomes. If you're on Twitch and haven't gone over and checked out the YouTube, go search Fox and Board Games on YouTube, and you can sign up there, and you'll see not only the archives, the eventual archives of um, all of these broadcasts, but there'll be some exclusive content coming on there in the next few weeks to months. Probably a month or so is more like it. Foxandboardgames.com is where you can find everything about the games I'm working on and about this channel and all that stuff. Twitter and Facebook at Fox and Board Games. And please like and subscribe to these various channels. Thank you for your support. I couldn't do this without you. And it would be no fun doing this without viewers and participants in the audience. So, with that, where are we at today? I've got to set up a few things. So today, it's going to be a short week. I have 2 streams, today and tomorrow. And I kind of miscalculated some timing, and I thought I'd be here Wednesday night, but I won't. I'll be on a plane. So, for 2 weeks. I'll be away for 2 weeks. So, again, we're going to be taking a little break, but then after this, it's going to be a fairly steady schedule. And in fact, I do intend to up my stream schedule and my frequent stream content and all of these other exciting things. Provide some custom content to both Twitch and YouTube, exclusive content, and I'm also gonna be expanding how I treat the tavern chat, and I think I'm gonna have a couple guests on to talk about their game development, their game experiences, their experiences in gaming, and hopefully it'll be a pretty interesting, diverse crowd. That's my goal. I'm already in talks with a few people. Kind of a interesting talk yesterday with a good friend of mine who is a media consultant for a couple of big clients. One or two of you may have heard of, but some of them are, many of them are smaller or just starting out like myself. So we're going to really be working on a project plan when I get back, and hopefully this will keep expanding beyond its current confines. So we'll see where today's stream takes us. It's been kind of entering the kind of chaos mode pre-travel, and like I said, for some reason I thought I had another day or two to really prep, and then I said this to a couple friends of mine. I ended up just kind of cutting myself short and realizing over the weekend, Saturday night, I've only got a couple days. So it might not be as long of a stream today and tomorrow's packed full. I have several various online appointments that I have to attend to before I can do anything else. So I will be streaming a bit tomorrow. And then we will hopefully, when I get back, first week in October, hit the ground running and really get things going. So, should be a good resuming of our regular activities. Just looking over my notes here and where I was at the end of last week. I looked at this a little bit over the weekend, filled out some things. So, at the end of last week, we ended up working on one of the new scenarios for Tales in depth. Welcome back. Thanks, Microsoft Office. I will be taking my computer and whatnot overseas. I don't really think I will have a significant chance to do a lot of streaming, but who knows? Maybe you'll see a stream with a Roman era vineyard in the back for real atmosphere for this game. As some of you know, this game is heavily inspired by our own ancient world. Not even as much the medieval per se, but the much further back ancient world. And the area where I'm staying in southern Germany is wine country, old wine country, the edge of the Roman Empire. One of the borders. So it'd be kind of cool to stream a little bit from there. So here's where we're at. And again, I got to a point with this actually that I wasn't sharing some of what I was writing and talking about only because, people might be playing this. So as I think I discussed with folks, the game is set up in a kind of non-traditional fashion. Non-traditional in terms of fantasy RPGs, where things are very specifically delineated into encounters, chapters, stories, sagas, and part of that's because that's the way advancement works in the game. But that's also a great organizational tool. Pause for 1 second. And see if the dog needs to re-enter the house. Watching, you may have just missed it. You may have just seen a cat bomb. It's the time of the day cat bombing begins to occur. Though it's 2 hours till their feeding time. Naturally, they start early. I think a good point to resume today. I'll be working on this scenario. So I am bringing the laptop, and I will be working on stuff while I'm away. We will have a good amount of downtime, and one of the things I am going to be doing is working on the scenarios. I think that might be a way that I can utilize a little bit of downtime, but not feel like I'm being absorbed by this instead of enjoying my surroundings. But I think that might be a good time to review where I'm at with the various rule sets as well. It's that time of the year. Pumpkin everything. Let's work on a quick reference document. Basically, your GM sheet, and rules reference for players. That's something else I can work on over the next couple weeks. Let's see. Chapter outlines. Is that what I'm looking for? Chapter 1, introduction. Take a review of this document. Prices and economy. Do a little review of that now that I've started actually fleshing out some of the playtest characters or the game characters. This was a lot of fun research. There are some presumptions that are in place where you make a leap that certain things existed or would be valuable or hard to come by. In the ancient world, and then rereading, then doing some research, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. So there are certain things were around a lot longer than I even thought. And I'm, by no means a trained historian, a trained academic historian, but I have a reasonable amount of research. For this game, I put equipment in different categories because this not only helps with pricing it out and the scarcity of it, but also when people are crafting or using one of their trade skills, how rare of an item they manage to make or how successful they might be trying to make a really uncommon item. There's my phone notice. There's a cat notice. I'm expecting a couple calls today and messages, so let me see what we've got going on. The one thing about the ancient world, and that we recently discovered in our travels, how ubiquitous the consuming of horse meat was. In the modern West, it's not as common anymore due to the various values of horses. But in Scandinavia, apparently, it's still quite a thing. In fact, there are certain commercial sausages you can get that are horse meat, which is, again, there's kind of have developed in many countries a little bit of a taboo of eating horse meat or an avoidance of eating horse meat because they are considered animals that are closer to us in some way and it's not as economically feasible. But horse was a pretty common food in most of the world, and apparently in some parts of the world it's still not uncommon. So I did have players ask about a couple items that they wanted prices of that were not specifically in the list. I should maybe send that out to the players too, so they have an idea. Lots of chirping cats around at the moment. All right. The reference sheet, compliments of Curzon, traditional travel times on various terrains, various travel methods in the ancient world. It's a pretty useful document. It's from Stanford, so I'm going to assume it's kind of legitimate. It's not Bob's cousin on the internet who made it up. for D&D. I didn't consult anything. What should be realized, though, even though I incorporate a lot of this era of history and these kinds of historical notes into my teaching in the graphic arts, is just how expensive ink and paper of any kind, vellum or parchment or anything like that, were. It's extremely expensive. That's why things like illuminated manuscripts or drawings are such big deals. It's such a big deal. Do a little review of the rules. This is a weird thing when you go back over what you've written and you think, how much of this are people who play this game actually going to follow? You know, like how much of it they're just going to look at and say, well, this is kind of cool, but I think I'm going to change this and throw this out the window and just use this. And that's kind of the joy of these things, is that, you know, I might come across someone at some point playing this game and they'll be doing things that I never even thought of with this system. The action economy in this game is definitely a bit unique, and it's something I'm still trying to definitely nail down. I mean, we've seen quite a bit of it work well. Excuse me. That was Every day. A lot going on in the background. Um, Meeting before and after the stream. There's always so much that's situational in terms of, things like, knock and fire a bow. And it normally costs 2 action points, but then you start to think of all these circumstances in which it might cost more or less, but you can't really adjust for all that. You have to just kind of make this assumption at a medium, and say this is how it's going to work. And then, of course, if people want to adjust it on their own. They are more than welcome to do so. As always, I have several different documents open that I'm looking at and cross-referencing to make sure I have actually put things where they need to go in these documents. The next major task I have, especially after talking about timelines and the business end of this, is to make the narrative flow between the different sections of the book really work. Because that's one thing that I'm still lacking a bit of. While all the components might be there, isn't really a flow. Check back to the scenario. Finding today is a little bit less intentional than my streams last week, and this is more kind of mentally getting together what I have to put where, what I really have to work on next. And I know the next major thing are the scenarios to play and to run. But I'm also trying to figure out where the book's at in terms of placing the info. So I threw a few notes in as I look over the scenario content. So I also have a bunch of notes for a Call of Cthulhu scenario that I haven't really started on yet, but it would be a one shot. Maybe I'll take some time now and I'll transcribe that a little bit. These are notes from my phone that I made while away last time. That's it on the title doc. Let's see. I still have them on my phone. I hope I do. I have one document on my phone that's all game ideas. It's funny looking at some of these, how they kind of originated in my mind versus how they eventually ended up on paper. Hope I still have that. Okay, here we go. So, professor. I was reading an interesting thread on one of the Cthulhu forums the other day about the buy-in. I was talking a little bit about that when I was working on the scenario last week, the Tales scenario. Like I've built in a couple buy-ins for the characters. But, Call of Cthulhu is a weird one because you basically have to buy into this entire genre. Not only just the scenario, but this whole genre. And that's the one thing that I've found the hardest thing to get some players to do is to buy in on the genre. Speaking of genres. Hi, Cat. Come over here. Because a lot of the players, if they're experienced with the game, they're keenly aware that their characters may likely be doomed. That they can't win, basically. It's not a game where you have this heroic payoff of beating a monster or something like that. And it's so hard. And like I said, I even think my last group kind of struggled with that a little bit. Because it is a different thing. And I don't think it's something that everybody wants to get into, and that's fine. But I'm still trying, what's the buy-in going to be on the scenario that I have here? Like, they're called to the office of an eccentric anthology professor. So, like, do you have everybody make academic characters? Do you, assume they know the person? Kind of like with the gladiator scenario. I mean, I find it really interesting that the mechanism by which most adventure games operate is you are hired to do this. And I think this is a lot about our society, right? Like, that's still how you have to reduce it to many players to get them involved. Oh, you're being paid to do this. Oh, it's worth your time now. Whereas, like, you're sitting down to play this game about adventurers. And like, there's no other motive for you to do this but to be paid to do it. It's kind of a weird... it's part of the accepted paradigm. And you look at a lot of MMOs, and it's kind of built into a character story, which is, of course... Maybe the buy-in will be an interesting talk when I return for a tavern chat. As we see, there's also going to be a cat day, apparently. Who doesn't want cats visiting them? Of course, it's a black cat on my black shirt, so it's a nearly invisible cat. An obfuscated cat. Let's see if he knocks the microphone on the floor. Documents. This all came from this idea that I had. It was kind of like half sleep dream that somebody or something, or there was some discussion in my head about like what a skull really is and what it means to us and how we perceive it. And I kind of developed this whole scenario around it, which I thought could be really interesting. Yeah, that's not what I wanted to do. Just have to wait to see that. This cat has been having her snickety today. Right, desk. Hmm. Shoot for another 4 hour game, I think. always have to be careful when you're setting up a scenario that has like some monologue section, because you're like, wow, players, man, they're gonna tune this out after like 2 minutes. So I try to get what I want to say in there. This goes to the GM overdoing it again. Like, I can write as much as I want here to kind of flesh out my thoughts, but then I'm gonna have to reduce this introduction to be something that is digestible and relatable to the players in the immediate. You know, you only listen to an NPC talk for so long. It's kind of nice playing or writing for an NPC that is somewhat. We assume is going to be an academic, so you can actually use words like evaluated. It's always tough sometimes when playing an NPC when you think of something, and then you're like, oh well, wait, that guy would never say that, or the person would never say that like that. Well, that's a search result I didn't expect. Referencing the erosion of paper. How would it be a good way to describe like parchment or paper or parchment dissolving? And the first thing I come up with is the International Monetary Fund, the stealth erosion of dollar dominance, active diversifiers, and the rise of non-traditional reserve currencies. That's interesting. An abstract paper on economy, economic projections. No, that's not what I'm looking for. The great age of phrenology. And the kind of the crux of the scenario is talking about these kind of skulls, and where they're from. Some that don't seem quite human, as is often the case in these Lovecraftian scenarios. I kind of have the whole structure of the story in mind, but it's all kind of pinning on this initial opening monologue, which, as I said, is almost dangerous because it, players can get bored with that really quick. But I tend to think that Cthulhu players will be more attuned to paying attention to details in something that the professor is saying. Perhaps I should have a backup. So, put a note there to indicate there's more to write on this. But then I think I put a note here. Research notes. Spelling's good. Let's find out there's a severe low pressure system with storms coming through today. That help explain why I feel totally out of it today. Kind of that constant, not quite waking up feeling. I've had it all day, and that's often I often get that when low pressure systems come through. It's in the research notes. Always find a tangible referential note is best if you want players to actually remember what you said during a game. wish I could have immediately transcribed everything that I was thinking during this kind of half sleep state where I was thinking of this dialogue right onto a notepad. So as much as I tried to remember it from my notes here. Okay. This time of year is when I traditionally write and run a Call of Cthulhu scenario for a group. Last year's ended up going through March or April or longer. Actually, probably May or June. And we ended up with really sporadic game attendance. So this year we're going to handle it a little differently, I think. I think we're just going to dive in and then dive in on Tales of the Hard Land and plug through that, and who makes it, makes it. And then evaluate what we'll do next. So, the professor, we'll start defining him. I hadn't even really defined what he looked like, and I kind of have an idea. This would be a traditional Call of Cthulhu classic, 1920s. I've actually used Princeton as a locale instead of Arkham, largely because many of the games I've run have actually been near Princeton University itself, so it was always very accessible for the players, and most know what Princeton looks like, and they've been around, at least passing by the campus or through the campus, and it's very accessible for the group. So I've usually done that instead of Arkham. Don't know yet. I'd actually thought about maybe putting this in London too. I don't have a London source book for Cthulhu. I do have that on there. Amazing how when you go back through a folder, you find all these things that don't really need to be there, taking up space. I was looking for some reference material. So I thought I'd had. I think I have a hard copy of Green and Pleasant Land. It's pretty dated. I think there's a newer London source book. I mean, not that I can't find out enough about London. I don't know. We'll see where it's going to be held. So the professor. Let's see. Time to go to Google. Look at some names, right? It's kind of a cool name. Harlow Armstrong. I know the name Armstrong's traditionally Scottish. It's common in over most of the British Isles as well. Most fun things about these historical games is sometimes looking up fashions. I have friends really into clothes and fashions. Let's see. No, he doesn't seem like a vest waistcoat kind of guy. Seems more like a traditional suit jacket. Probably not a very fine one. Maybe a little out of date. Of course, you could go the other room, right? You could go very chic. Could be one of those academics who's very into the. But I don't see him being like that. I always look at men's fashions of former eras and think, boy, what happened? And it's so common for male identification to dress so blandly now. Interesting. Blue collar fashions. That's another option. So he might be an academic. Maybe he comes from relatively humble roots. That's kind of a cool page. I'll share that with you. Chat dialogue right there. Is that allowed? I think it did this to me once before. I don't think it allows rampant cutting and pasting to avoid spamming. It's kind of a cool cross section there. mean, suits haven't changed a lot, right? The accessories have, though. Top hat etiquette. Something I'm not familiar with. I'm sure somebody out there who watches this will know a little bit more about that. Ah, well, okay. Yeah, when you remove the hat. That I know. That I know. I know that just from. A well mannered gent would doff his hat to slightly raise the rim of the hat off of his forehead out of respect for a lady or figure of importance, or as the American flag passed by. All those important things. I had an elderly man in England once give me a little hat etiquette lesson because I normally don't wear hats. I don't wear hats a lot, but I did keep it. I would have it on as I was walking around. An elderly gentleman stopped me and informed me of hat etiquette when I entered certain buildings. So okay, it's interesting. So war, interwar is when we went to minimalist, or World War II is when we went to minimalist look. So I'll say his suit is tailored. Jump back to that. Tailored. Tailored tweed. Tweed. What is slightly fitting as if he has recently lost weight. There we go. Oh, hello. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining in. Caught me working on a Call of Cthulhu scenario instead of my own game. I was saying before, I had this idea about almost a month ago now. Well, I was away the first time in one of those kind of half sleep states of jet lag. I had this idea for the scenario. I was like, I gotta write some notes. And I took a few notes on my phone. And now I'm just finally fleshing it out a little bit. Thanks for coming on. Feel free to drop a follow to the channel if you have not. This week's going to be a little thing because I'm going to be traveling again come Wednesday. But we normally have some fun Wednesday night chats where we discuss aspects of gaming. The finest minds in gaming are usually there. Meaning the people who watch my channel. You know, 5 people or 6 people who usually join me. But it's usually fun. And it's going to be expanding. I already have some guests in mind and lined up for future talks. So I've heard that Twitch in October is going to stop allowing. Thank you. Is going to stop allowing bringing on other streamers as guests. So the one person's actually probably going to be here visiting when we do a stream. So that'll be one way to handle it. But I'm like, man, that's kind of an annoying thing. Like, of all the features to get rid of, I'm like, why would you do that? And I'm sure there's a reason. So right now we're working on Professor Armstrong, the opinion of the scenario. Professor Harlow Armstrong recently lost weight. Does not seem to evidence smoke or alcohol use, at least not recently. There, you know he's not an academic, a real academic, or a sane academic right there, because he's not. Well, yeah, that's like all these platforms, right? I mean, I've been watching some of the people comment on it that, oh, there's probably a reason. It's probably a really dumb reason, but yeah, that's how way it goes. There are ways around it, of course. I could, zoom in and share a screen and do a zoom and then share a screen and stuff like that. As long as it's not a public simulcast. Smoke or alcohol use, at least not recently. Around the world. Particularly Stone Age to Ice Age, Europe, Asia, South America. Let's see. So do you do game writing and gaming? I assume you are if you're hanging out on this channel. If you do some TTRPG stuff of your own. It's kind of cool. I've got one or two people who come on here once a week or so just to chat about some of their ideas, and I think that's pretty cool too. Around the world, particularly Stone Age, Ice Age, Europe, Asia, South America. Stone knife. Otherwise strange. Yeah, same. that's pretty much that's part of the whole reason for doing this channel is I spend so much time initially just writing for fun, for hobby gaming, then looking at publication, then working on my own game. And Curzon, who's been on lurking today, said, you should just start streaming all this stuff. You do so much working on this game material. I was like, okay, that's a great idea. And it is a great idea. I got a couple games I'm playing, and I'm actually playing in Pathfinder World of Darkness. Yeah, both of those are interests of mine. World of Darkness I go way back with from first edition Vampire, pretty much all the way through. I haven't checked out the new version yet, only because I haven't had a group to run or play it with. We just did a V20, a couple sessions of a V20 game that I got to play in. I'm playing D&D right now. Once a week, 5th Ed. And I got a Star Wars game I'm playing on occasion. That's kind of fun. But I'll be running this game when I get back from traveling in a couple. Not the Cthulhu game, but my game. When I get back from traveling in a couple weeks. Continue the playing of it, seeing if it actually works. Looks great on paper. At least I think it does. See what happens when players get a hold of it. Yeah, it's nice to have a few games I'm actually playing in. It's a nice break. So that's corner collection of oddities from around the world. Polynesia, that's what. Eastern Europe. Define that a little bit more. So already we're trying to get some identity for the professor and his studies. Yeah, I don't know too much about it. Neil, who is a friend of mine, plays Enron games and is on here every now and then. He might be into Cypher. I'm sure he knows of it. He's very knowledgeable of new systems. Oh, Numenera. Okay, I just looked it up. It's strange. Yeah, I don't know that one. I mean, I know of it. I've heard of it, but I haven't had much experience with it, or any experience with it. Now that I think about it, it's a weird thing. Like we've even talked about this in our group. Like these kind of odd games that we're not as familiar with. I mean, I've played dozens of RPGs systems over the years, but like right now, even by doing things online, we have such a limited amount of time. Like people, I think, kind of play what they know, want to play what they know. They want to play in worlds they know. Like I love Pathfinder too, and I've only played a little bit of it. And I haven't actually run a full game of it, and I'd like to do that. I'd like to really dig into it and run it. And I've read through the rule book and rereading the rule book as one does with Pathfinder. But my current group is definitely not rules crunchy. Like they're not as into the minutia of rules and strategy and some of these things that I think Pathfinder has more focus on over D&D 5th Ed. Which, like I said, I think the great thing about 5th Ed is I could sit down with people who've never played a game, an RPG, and get them running stuff, get them playing stuff within half an hour. Whereas Pathfinder, like making a character until you really know what you're doing, takes some time. I should jump in on some online Pathfinder games at some point. That'd be kind of cool. Get to know them a little bit. Get to know it just a little bit more before I run it. So I can. Yeah, I like everything about it that I've read. I played first Ed Pathfinder a few times, and I was kind of like, and it wasn't that long after, or that long. Fifth Ed hadn't fully really broken yet, and I was like, I'll just play D&D 3.5 if I'm gonna play this, So I knew D&D 3.5 really well, and sort of the group. But Pathfinder 2 is definitely its own game, and I really like it. The games I've played of it, the fact that I can make two or three different characters of the same class and race, and they'll be very different even at low levels, I thought was really cool. I really appreciated that. Otherwise, strange soapstone like hand question mark soapstone question mark like hand objects. Jewelry. So put the obligatory level of creep in there. Let's see. And the reality is, even though now I've got more contact with gamers than I have in a very long time, and I play more and run more than a very long time. There's still only so many hours in the day, and to dig into every game you want is so difficult. Polynesia. Let's spell it correctly, first of all. That'd be the correct way to do things here. Yeah, seriously. Definitely do. Time. How should I call this? Time compartmentalization machines, right? Like, oh, one part of me will just live in this cubicle where I could just play RPGs or run RPGs or whatever. No, no one needs to work. We just play RPGs or whatever. Go to school. For system, let's see. Shady Five Faces. He has fewer books than Professor, but reams and reams of notes. In binders on the wall, shelf, and in his desk. There we go. There's Nightbot saying hello. Hasn't kicked anyone off today. Threatened to ban one of my regular viewers for accidentally typing in all caps last week. It was pretty funny. I was like, really? Like, he's on here all the time. Don't ban him, Nightbot. Pipe. So how much do you prep for your games? That's an ongoing discussion on these chats, because a lot of times I'm doing just that, and I've had a couple chats at night dedicated to talking about prep and process. Do you end up doing a lot of prep or more on the fly? What's wrong? The man with mouse brown hair, a kept mustache, but only stubble for beard. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like I said, this scenario I traveled about a month ago and I was jet lagged, and I don't remember if it was on the plane. I think it was on the plane before we disembarked, or after we traveled for a day and got to a hotel room or something, and I was like one of those half sleeps, and then these ideas just started coming into my head, and I was like, oh, quick, I better get these down. Yeah, no, that's a good point. This all always boils down to, I think it depends on the game and the group too. Like D&D, I can do a lot on the fly. Like I could take. I've been doing it for so long, and I'm so familiar with the kind of genre that I just kind of take a few loose notes. I flesh out a few key areas or NPCs or encounters, and then I just kind of let the players go on it. Whereas something like Call of Cthulhu, I find I really need to put the details in there. Or the game I'm working on, I need to really put the details in there. If for no other reason, so I know them, even if they never get to really dig into some of this background. Of course, it always changes too once they get into the game. Yeah, well, and that's where I'm at too. I mean, I just have so many source books from so many games and so many iterations of these games, and even if the systems are different, this great NPC that I read about in this other source book or scenario. Sometimes I'll go, oh yeah, I should use him in this, and just keep it next to me, or copy him if it's digital, copy and paste it into one document. Though some of the most memorable games, and I'm sure you and most gamers know this, come from just like something just happening in the middle of the game that nobody plans, nobody expects, and you go, wow, this was this. I didn't even plan this, and this is great. World of Darkness is another weird one too. Like I've mostly played Vampire, but yeah, so that's what I was just gonna say. Between 0 and 1, there is a lot of prep, and I always say Vampire is the game I've probably singly played the most. I've run D&D more, but I've played Vampire the most, and I prefer to play it than run it because it is this very different thing. Especially if you start drawing in all the other supernatural entities and whatnot, it becomes this kind of all-consuming thing, and you really need the right group to play it. That's just it's one of those games that like a lot of traditional fantasy players, much like Call of Cthulhu, they have trouble accessing it because it is a different thing. I was just shocked to see how popular World of Darkness had become again because I've played it on and off. I played it a lot in the '90s, and I played it on and off over the last the interim years, and then just when people started streaming it, it became like really popular again. I guess vampires and supernatural creatures never go out of style, much like fantasy. It's still the one environment too that I think really has the capability to disturb people. Like just even a couple of the recent sessions, even some of the player characters, other players found really disturbing, and I'm like, oh, it's a game about horror. You know, it's not really necessarily meant to be a cheery group fun game. It's a different kind of game, and people either get it or they don't. Yeah, no, that about tracks. I last ran Vampire maybe 5 or 6 years ago, um, and I did just that. I kind of wrote up the city overview. It was set in Baltimore. The city overview, and yeah, I had like who was most active, what groups were most active, both vampire, human, other, and then yeah, I of course made the big NPCs and a few small ones. That game tends to be, if you know the group, that game also does tend to be very good for playing freeform. But as a storyteller, you have to have so much in your mind as to how everything they do is going to affect everything else in the city. And that's one way that it really differs from almost every other game I've played or run. Yeah, exactly. Before they escalate their own problems to the point of no return. But that's always the joke about that game. Like especially if you deal with vampire, you're always like these characters live for 600 years and nothing interesting happens. Then in a week, everything just goes downhill. Like as soon as the game starts, a week later, everything's in shambles. We've had 500 years of peaceful, well, not peaceful, but 500 years of uneventful for a vampire existence, and now everything snowballs. I mean, that's kind of role playing games, though. Anyway, right? Like how boring are these adventurers when they're not out fighting a monster? Trinkets in a dim, windowless office. And archives. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much exactly it. Yeah, I mean that's especially a lot of new players. I hear them say things like, "Oh, but what if they do all these things I don't plan for?" I'm like, that's what they're gonna do. Do you think like 90% of the games I've ever run, you've all done what I actually thought you were going to do? That's you don't play these games necessarily for stability. That to me is part of the. That's why it is what it is. That's why the games. That's why they're games and not storytelling and simulation. And then the dice get involved, and it becomes this entirely separate thing. Yeah, that's actually a big joke. Peach is not on now, but he comes on at night quite often, and that was the big joke Peach and I used to say about Cyberpunk. Yeah, my characters had to kill 33 people going out to get Chinese food. It ends up being like this. Like, yeah, sure, this is gonna be easy. How hard could this be? What's gonna go wrong? Yeah, the mistakes are subjective. One player's and game master's mistakes are another's good story. That's what I think is really fascinating about taking a scenario and running it with multiple groups. Is inevitably at some point during this scenario, somebody does something that nobody else had thought of, or I had even thought of, or imagined would be a thing. And I'm sitting there like, all right, well, okay, that's I guess I'm gonna have to work around that now because there was no way that all the playtesting in the world could have planned for that series of events to unfold. Like as I write these words describing this professor's mannerisms, his speech is steady and thoughtful. speech is steady and thoughtful. It seems to often be a monologue or internal conversation that he is verbalizing. Stares intently at things when he talks, not people. He doesn't avoid eye contact, but doesn't seem concerned with the human connection. And I could just imagine the players already constructing this entire scenario out of why he's like this, instead of this literally being my notes on his mannerisms. Like that they're not relevant to his state of mind necessarily. I mean, or they're not relevant to the plot. And people could immediately evoke all these things that are going on by that simple word that he doesn't seem to be looking at your eyes a lot. Oh my God, what's he hiding? What's he doing? What's he trying to avoid? Discussing the nature of the skulls. Let's see. Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, right. It could be both. Right. Well, I picture him being a little neurodivergent. I mean, this would be the 1920s before we necessarily had that terminology. But yeah, that's exactly how I see that he's not. Watch what he's looking at. Yeah, exactly. It could be a clue. Well, in this case it might be, but it's just funny that I could see this entire thing going on around that one description. Um, Interesting note. When were highlighter pens invented? Because I was just thinking he would definitely be the type of guy to have like a highlighter. I don't think they were this old, but I'm curious, of course. I don't know. Not are they permanent? When were they invented? Yeah, 1960s. So they're not in place. Yeah, 62. Um, they're not in place for a 20s game. Pen and then perhaps different colored. Multicolored. I mean, you wouldn't have paint. I guess you have different colored inks in pens. Let's get paper and pens in various colors for highlighting. There we go. All right. I think I'm going to actually start wrapping it up for today. As I said, this week streams will be a bit abbreviated as I prep to travel. Chapbook, yeah, chapbook might be a thing. That would definitely fit his demeanor. He's a anthropologist, so he'd also probably keep things like almanacs, like folkloric almanacs, and you know um, monographs and things like that around. So that's make a note of that. Put that on the bookshelves, maybe on his desk. Yeah, thanks for the subscription. I appreciate it. I don't have as a lot of subscription stuff in play yet, but I am going to be providing some subscriber goodies. Like I said, I'm going to be traveling for 2 weeks. So when I get back, I'm going to really pump all this up. And I just had a meeting with a project manager too, who's helping me really get the game design company and all that up going. And with that, the streaming will increase. Oh yeah, no, I appreciate it, but I do like to give. I like to provide goodies, even if they're just like some links to premium to exclusive content, stuff like that. If you have a channel or a any kind of media presence, feel free to drop it. Oh, I'm gonna look. I'll look at your profile when I'm done here, but feel free to drop it in the chat too if you have anything for people to look at. That's part of why I do this. It's for people to spread their ideas, spread their info. Yeah, exactly. A minor buff. It's perfect. Well, thanks very much for that. I appreciate it. As I said, every little bit helps. As I give my spiel at the beginning and end of this, I always say everything, every subscribe, every like, every follow on YouTube or whatever on for social media always helps. And with that, I think we're going to get to that part of the broadcast. So I'll pop up the like and subscribe, drop down the. Yeah, absolutely. I'd really like to when I get my game really running and I make sure that the group really gets it and it's smooth. Do some stream playthroughs of it, for no other reason, so people can actually see the game being played and learn what it's about. But right now, I'm just really focusing on streaming the game content, and part of it is I got an academic sabbatical. I actually am a professor, so I got an academic sabbatical to work on these game and related projects. So this is kind of my job right now, which is nice. So it's and hopefully beyond that, it'll become a thing, a primary thing that I do. So yeah, it was a good snag. One of the benefits of academia. There aren't a lot. Stuff like this is the benefit. You sure aren't making big bucks. Even full time, you don't make big bucks. You make enough, but not huge amounts. But then being able to do stuff like I would take a year off and write a game. You can throw some cash my way. Would be great. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, it would be. It would be. And I like teaching. I like teaching a lot, but I'm at the point I'd like to do my own creative stuff. I do a bunch of other stuff too. I do photography and music and a whole bunch of art stuff, but I'd really like to just really get the game stuff going. I've got other people who want to publish through my company, some really nice stuff, some really good stuff. And so I really want to get that going. And that's, like I said, I'm kind of making it a priority, making it a business priority. I think there's no better time. I've joked around, with friends that I've spent my whole life playing RPGs and never thought that Whoever thought that 35 years in Dungeons and Dragons would pay off, right? You know, it's like all those years that someone said, "Oh, you're wasting your time." Oh, I think I looked. That is not the important call. I don't think. Not to say that any call is unimportant, but I don't believe that that is the call that I have to interrupt the stream for. Watch the joke be on me. Let me take this. Well, I am glad I took that because it was not urgent, but it was basically my one surviving relative lost power and was trying to get in touch with me and and just to relay a message because before I travel, and I was like, well, it's a good thing I picked up because I was just not even gonna pick up. But yeah, so well, thanks for coming on, thanks for subscribing, thanks for chatting. Hopefully, I'll be on again tomorrow. Then I said I'll be off for a couple weeks, but um, so from the tomes, if you're seeing this on Twitch, yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for joining. If you're on Twitch, you know where I'm at. Feel free to go over and check out Fox and Board Games on YouTube. That's where these are going to be eventually archived, and I'll have some custom content. I already have some custom content for YouTube up there, and foxandboardgames.com, and then Fox and Board Games on Twitter and Facebook, and more social media is coming. It is in the works, and a big thanks for all the subscribing, following, and supporting. As I said, I'll be on again tomorrow my normal time for a little bit, and then I'll be off for a couple weeks. But in the meantime, I'll definitely be providing some more content through my other channels and getting some writing done even while I'm lounging in another place far away. So thanks again for everybody for watching and for chatting and for following. And I'll see you again soon. Have a good one.